First item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Keith makes the motion. Any second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mary. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Thumbs up. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from December 21, 2021. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Everybody
Aye.
is on Zoom. Everybody, I think, tonight.
Could you say the names of who made the motion and who seconded, because I'm not recognizing them?
Who made the motion? I mean, sorry, who, Keith. And who second?
I second it. Becca Coffee.
Okay. Thank you, Becca. And my apologies, my screen changed, so I couldn't see you either. I think that happened to everybody, but it looks like we're back into the regular gallery mode. Just run again, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Any opposed? Aye. Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is Tracy's going to give an update on strategies for necessary advisory, and that's with respect to Lincoln in particular, property values, equalized pupil counts, and draft work plan updates, as well as what's been happening in the legislature. Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Per your request at the last meeting, I did follow up with the Agency of Education regarding strategies for necessary and advisory districts in the articles, and any insight that they can offer us. And I wanted to let you know that the agency reported that the House Education Committee plans to take up Chapter 11 in its entirety in the coming session. So review and changes to the chapter and the laws that affect this process and shape unified unions and mergers in the future will be being discussed and potentially changed. They are also separately planning to address withdrawal of districts from unified unions, which is a part of Chapter 11, Section 724. And we do know from our local experience and conversations that this section really lacks clarity and is procedurally complicated and confusing. Of course, we don't know at this time if changes will be enacted, and if they do, what the substance of those changes will be, and whether or not they'll affect the study process or Lincoln's withdrawal process. So I encourage the committee to remain very flexible and study plan considerations and options thoughtfully so that you can be prepared to modify articles or pieces of the study quickly based upon your deep study of the options up until the point that legislative changes are clear and their impact on your process is clear. I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes by Pasteur, which is "Chance favors the prepared mind." And this committee has already done some very deep study, and I suspect that additional deep study of options and considerations will help you to respond when the variables become clearer with regard to Lincoln. I do want to emphasize that town meeting day is the next clear event that gives shape to future options. If one of the towns of the district right now votes no, the committee can more reasonably plan on the structure for a possible merger if the committee recommends that one be brought to the electorate to be voted on. If all the towns vote yes, what we know is that there are a number of additional steps that need to be undertaken, and they include State Board of Education approval and involvement, an agreement on the costs for withdrawal, including repaying debt and any other transition costs that are discussed and agreed upon, and a second or an additional vote by the electorate of all of the towns other than the withdrawing town on to approve those withdrawal costs. So there's a lot of new and additional developments that the committee should be prepared to respond to as the work progresses. So that's the update on necessary and advisory. What I would add is that I think as you dive more deeply into draft articles, you'll see as a committee that there are options in terms of how you address articles, such as for board composition, where you can position yourself well to be responsive to a number of possible pathways that a withdrawal of a district and the creation of an advisory district might prepare you to respond to. So that's it on necessary and advisory and strategies for Lincoln. Mary Kate, would you like me to keep going through all the updates or pause for any questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and pause. Any questions on that update in terms of what's happening in the legislature and strategies for dealing with that? Okay, seeing none, Tracy, why don't you go ahead to the
I
Dave has his hand up.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Dave.
So I'm sorry I'm late. I only caught about half of what Tracy had to say. But I thought I heard her say that we're preparing for a vote on March town meeting day to approve the articles of agreement. Is that or to move forward with the merger, or what did I miss?
So in March, each of the towns will vote on whether to approve Lincoln's withdrawal from the districts, and that's what Tracy was referring to. Okay,
thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, anything else? And please, if I miss someone. Okay, go ahead, Trace, why don't you move on to the next.
Okay, I committed at the last meeting to update you on insured property values for the schools and MAUSD. Haven't gotten that from the insurance company yet. The holiday break makes it a little harder to move on some of the details, but I wanted you to know that was still on the radar and will be updated as soon as we have that. Within the same resource, you asked about the specific equalized pupil counts for Lincoln so that committee members can think about the ways that proportionate contributions and services might be weighed between ANWSD and MAUSD. And that has been added to the considerations documents. The equalized pupil count for Lincoln that was incorporated into the counts that were on the December 21st document is 198.3 38/100ths, or about 8.23% of the total of the two districts combined. So that's been updated on that informational sheet. Want to clarify that you will see different equalized pupil counts in different places, including as individual districts move forward with tax rate projections and budget development for the coming school year. Equalized pupil counts, the equalized pupil counts for this calculation were estimates that were developed by the finance directors for the respective districts earlier in the fall, and the state will be calculating new ones for tax purposes later on, but this count should give you a good idea of how weighted students might be proportioned across the two member districts.
Any questions on that? All right, Tracy, draft work plan update.
Yep. Yep, there's just been a couple of updates to the draft work plan. As I have in the past, I highlighted them in yellow. Just wanted to emphasize that they reflect a very flexible period over the next several meetings, where issues such as some of the ones you're starting to discuss tonight, like school closure and board composition, might take several meetings. In the work plan, there was some wiggle room between this point in time and town meeting, and I just want to foreshadow that it's likely that you'll utilize that, including perhaps to prepare for ways to get additional input during town meeting, but those updates are highlighted in the document, and I'll continue to use that to communicate potential plans for work, especially during this flexible time.
Any questions on the work plan updates? Okay, Tracy, let's go ahead and move on to item 5 on the agenda, review of the articles approved at the last meeting and consideration of additional language for Article 3 and Article 4.
Sure. Attached to the meeting agenda is an updated set of draft articles of agreement. At prior meetings, you have granted or given preliminary approval to Article 1, 2, and part of Article 3. Article 6, which has 3 points, and one section of Article 7. And my hope is that you've had a chance to look at those again between meetings, or we could pause briefly and allow people to read those over and take an opportunity to reflect on whether they say what you thought they were going to say, particularly after we've made a few tweaks and adjustments. And secondly, there was a request at the last meeting to consider some additional language to Article 3 that drew on language that was in prior articles of agreement and emphasized a commitment to equal educational opportunities for students. So that information is, or that language is there for your consideration. I could pause there before we talk about Article 4, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Any questions, any discussion regarding the Article 3 proposed language and the highlighted language? I just had one comment whether or not we want to have equal or equitable, and whether anybody has thoughts on that. I see Dave has his hand raised. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I support changing the word from equal to equitable.
Anybody else? Do you want to kind of show a thumbs up, thumbs down on the change? Thumbs up. Okay. Anybody opposed to changing that language? All right. Tracy? sounds like we're all in agreement that we'd like it to be equitable as opposed to equal.
Perfect. I will update that and formalize the revision for you. Article 4, we discussed at the last meeting, and there was a question about whether or not Article 4 needed to be there or not, and an interest in communicating clearly that construction and major renovations weren't necessary for the merger, but an interest also in not in any way constraining the future board and making sure a future board, if a merger occurs, making sure that the language is clear in that way. In the comments, I added some potential language to address that, but do want to affirm that the agency feels that that article is required. So would encourage you to address that in a way that you feel comfortable with in your draft articles.
Tracy, did you get a sense from talking with them whether adding that language that you've proposed is needed, or whether they think, of course, based on the powers that a board has, a new board would have, that they could, you know, add new buildings if necessary? Or
it's my impression that additional language would not be needed. The language as originally drafted would be sufficient. The decision to add something additional would be a decision of the committee in order to communicate clearly to the community in response to committee members' worries that somehow saying no new buildings or renovations were necessary might be perceived at some point to have not communicated clearly future possibilities.
Thanks. What are people's thoughts on this, adding this additional language or something similar to what Tracy's proposed? Go ahead, Keith.
I mean, the existing language is fairly clear, but I don't think it would hurt to add something, if only for the sake of making it clear to the community. I guess what Tracy said.
All right, anybody else have any comments? Go ahead, Dustin.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Well, I like how Tracy put it in the comment where she's got the quoted text, just to make it a little clearer for the community. And just so that down the road, there's not, people don't point to that article and say, well, they said here that there was no new renovations needed for this, when for reasons we can't foresee now, a renovation or something like a renovation might be needed.
Thanks, Dustin. Kevin?
I have mixed feelings. I mean, I'm not hard on this, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And when we start putting in extra language, we should be really careful that we don't end up down the road with something that wasn't what we thought it was going to be. So I'm okay with just a single sentence.
Anybody else? Given that we're not we don't have everybody on the same page, we probably should maybe look at how many people are in favor of adding the language and how many people are in favor of keeping it as it is at this point. Again, these are preliminary. Can I have a sort of thumbs up in terms of who wants to add the language for clarifying to the community? All right, keep them up so I can see. Yeah, 4. And then how many people want to change the language? I'm sorry, leave just the language as it is. Sounds like Kevin and Ed. So it looks like, and please, I've got two screens to look at, and Martha and Tracy, please help me with that. But it looks like Kevin and Ed are in favor. Brad's kind of either way.
I was looking at page 2, and they were taking a nap. Nothing yet. So
is there anybody besides Kevin and Ed that feel like we should just leave the language as it and not add the additional sentence? Please speak up, just because I want to make sure I get everybody. All right. So it sounds like most people would like to have that clarifying language. Kevin and Ed, are you guys both okay with that? Okay. All right. So Tracy, I think you have your directions on that.
I do. Thank you very much.
So we're moving on to agenda item 6, disposal sale of real estate, Article 7B. Go ahead, Tracy.
At the last meeting, I was able to introduce the content of that article, draft article, and provide some information on sources and where the various pieces of language come from. My request was that you take a moment and read over that draft article between last meeting and this meeting. And my hope is that you'd engage in any discussion or raise any questions you have about that language, and perhaps preliminarily approve that language this evening.
Can I get clarity? What language are we considering to approve this evening?
Sure. We are looking at Article 7B, which pertains to disposal of real estate. And the draft language is lifted from the Articles of Agreement from 2016 when A&W and MAUSD were formed, and addresses the unique circumstances of some of the property in the respective districts and what might need to be considered if that was ever to be disposed of, any of it was ever to be disposed of, as well as general procedures for potentially returning property to municipalities when applicable.
And that the articles are attached to the agenda, so I'm assuming everybody can pull those up. If anybody's having trouble, if you could speak up, that would be helpful. All right. Has everybody had a chance to read through that?
I have something.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. The articles for Addison Northwest address the Virgins property, but not the Ferrisburg and Addison property. And they do have different terms than the Mount A properties. So if we're going to talk about Virgins in Waltham and Panton in here, we should probably have language about Addison and Ferrisburg, especially if it has different terms. I don't know if the terms for those towns are different, but that should also be in here.
I think, Mary, unless I'm missing a detail, that the areas where terms are different are areas where the forming districts, where there were union schools that had shared ownership of property. So they need special consideration because there isn't a single municipality for them to go back to. But for clarity, the language could, in the section that generally addresses returning facilities to a municipality, we could mention individual municipalities there just so it's more consistent, if that makes sense. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, I need to get, my computer just died, so I'm using my phone. I am curious about if at the moment, if you sell it back, it goes back to like the original owner, but at this point is now the owner MAUSD and ANWSD. And so that's who then has the right to sell it, even though they're not really anything. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like I'm confused about who the owner becomes after the fact, and if the clarifying language is I guess I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah, and maybe I don't know if we need a legal opinion or if you've looked into this, Tracy, but it does, I think what Sarah's saying is true, and yet each of those two districts, Mount Abe and Addison Northeast, have agreements that they're bound by and would, I would think, also be bound by later, but it's a little murky. Yeah.
But if those don't exist anymore, then who is it? I guess is my question.
That's exactly what these articles, this section of the articles is trying to cover. So if a merger is approved, all of the real and personal property would be transferred to the new entity. If that property is no longer needed, the articles are required to specify what would happen. They can't revert to ANWSD and MAUSD because they no longer exist. So the articles are attempting to specify what was in the 2016 articles, which is that properties would be returned to the municipalities, or in the case of union schools where there isn't a municipality to return them to based on the terms of the original formation of the union, which is most complex for Virgin's Union Elementary School, but also for the union high schools, the former union high schools, that those be sold.
Okay, that's helpful. Do other people have questions? And Martha, if you could also keep an eye on the second page. Go ahead, Dustin.
Well, I'm just curious if our current articles agreement in MAUSD and in Addison, state what happens when, the merged district no longer exists, and wouldn't it just follow that, and then those municipalities would be, the school buildings would become part of the new merged district, and the language in the new articles agreement would read very similar to what, the current MAUSD language would be?
You hit it spot on. That is what the articles are, this draft article is attempting to do.
Anybody else have any questions? Are people generally supportive of, in that the second yellow paragraph, adding the names of the towns to try to add clarity? How about a thumbs up on that? Is anybody not in favor of that?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Erica, go ahead.
It seems like it might fit better in the first paragraph.
rather than just putting it in the paragraph where it explains what happens if the town decides not to keep the property.
It seems like you think.
Erica.
Yep. Okay. So putting in some new language in that first paragraph about that sort of tracks it going back to each of the towns if it's not used. Go ahead, Dave, and then Brad.
I'm reading these 3 or 4 times, and it seems as though in this third paragraph, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph, in the event that at such subsequent time as the new determines that any of the real property once owned by the Mount Abraham Union Middle School District. So currently, I think the Mount Abraham Union Middle School District is the owner of all of the elementary schools in Starksboro, Lincoln, Bristol. So isn't that in conflict with the first paragraph that says it's going to the town? Here it says it's going, that the new board is going to decide, since they were once owned by the Mount Abraham Union Middle School District, the new board could decide to do something else and not return it to the towns as is specified in the first paragraph.
It's a great question, Dave. I believe that the Mount Abraham Union Middle High School District and Virgins Union High School Districts no longer exist. Those ceased. Those were the ones that operated the Union High Schools prior to the 2016 mergers. So that just identifies really the high school, the 2 high schools and their any associated buildings, and addresses what a new board could do with them if there was a merger. And what a new board could do with them is sell them, which is the same as is in place for the Union School District boards right now.
So I get that that's the intent, but I think in the second line where it says, including lands and buildings once owned by those 2 districts. So they currently own those buildings. So that means the Bristol Elementary School falls under that paragraph, because that school is currently owned by the Mount Abraham School District. And so this paragraph would apply, because it did once own. If the new board decides that they no longer want that building, they can decide what to do with it because it was once owned by the Mount Abraham Middle. I get the intent. I just think that the wording is incorrect.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a question of timing, right? So once we're merged, the Mount Abraham Union School District would have once owned all of the previous buildings. But
that's the way I read it, yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe the once owned is like prior to creating the Mount Abraham Union School District. Does that clarify it, Dave? Is that what you're, right? Owned by the Mount.
I think it needs a legal opinion. We have some lawyers, but yes, I think that gets to the idea.
Okay. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like this is a little above my pay grade, but we haven't talked about it yet. But we will be talking about school closure in the context of town voting. I wonder whether we should reserve some space here, or at least some opportunity if we need to, after we talk about the closure issue, to come back and look at this to make sure that there isn't inconsistencies between this article and an article that we haven't yet discussed.
Rebecca?
I was just looking at the paragraph about the closure of the Virgins Union Elementary School. And I was trying to get to it. And I'm not 100% clear as to what happens if that was closed. And maybe I'm just not understanding the jargon, but it says in the middle of it, it says like which the agreement is incorporated by reference into these article and is attached hereto as appendix number, and it just leaves it. And there's no appendix on this. So I just feel like there's something missing there. And I don't know if it's just me missing something or if you could just elaborate on that for me.
Right. That's the prior articles, right, Tracy?
Right. It's an exact replication of what was in the prior articles. And I can and would assist you with attaching the agreement that was attached in the prior articles to these articles when the time is right. I do want to pause and clarify and emphasize the importance of language right now.
Right.
And be clear that these articles are not about school closure. They're about disposal of property, and there are different statutory provisions with regard to those considerations. So I just want to be sure that we don't confuse anybody. Totally fine. I know you all understand exactly what we're doing and what we're talking about, but just know that we have guests and it's an important issue.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant disposal, but I just was unclear so those appendix and those sorts of things will be attached once this is not in draft form. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I can link it for you sooner rather than later. It's a pretty lengthy legal document.
Yeah, I figured that. Okay, thank you.
Right, but it just tracks what was previously done.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and Erica?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say in response to Dave's question, it seems like the language is slightly incorrect because what I understand you to be saying, Tracy, is that that last highlighted paragraph is referring to property that was owned by Mount Abe Middle High School or Virgins High School, Middle School before Act 46 mergers. But it wasn't Mount Abe before the Act 46 merger, correct? It was ANESU.
I will double check with Patrick, but I think it's likely that it was Mount Abe Union Middle High School District that owned the property. The supervisor unions can't own property.
Okay. So I think that might be the confusion. Yeah, no, I think that was my confusion because I saw Mount Abe and I thought that referred to the district that was formed after Act 46, but what it's referring to is just the high school and middle school as they were before Act 46. So they didn't own any other buildings.
Not to my knowledge. Patrick's nodding his head. That's correct, Erica.
That campus, there is another building on that campus, but that campus is the property that was owned by the high school. We'll call it high school as opposed to MAUSD.
So maybe there needs to be some clarifying language in terms of whether it should not say MAUSD as opposed to the high school. And maybe that's true for Gens as well. I'm not, yeah, I guess to the city, for Gens usually, yeah, so for Gens Union Elementary School, District 44, that's probably what owned that. So that's probably correct.
If this committee has spent some time studying the different governance structures, and we've struggled with union school district versus unified union supervisory district. If it's still something that is not easily sorted in reading the articles, I can certainly assist you with revising in a way that might make it clearer to a broader segment of people who might look at this at any point in time. So I'll work on a revision to that section.
Thanks, Tracy. I think also, you know, it'll have legal significance, so we want to make sure that it comports with what we all intended to. Andrea, is your hand up from before, or did you have something more?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say maybe including something like a date in that third highlighted paragraph, or reference to before 46 mergers or something would just clarify, but you're good. You can do that.
Okay, great. So Tracy, it sounds like you're going to work on the language for that. Are you good with where we're at right now, or do you need anything else from us?
I think I have sufficient direction. Thank you for your questions.
Okay. We're going to move on to Article 7, consideration of school closures, provide direction for draft articles. Before we start that discussion, I did want to confirm that the committee received, and I presumably everybody's already read a letter or an email from the Lincoln Select Board to the Merger Committee. It was forwarded by Paul Berlenza, the Vice Chair of the Select Board. We also received and reviewed a letter from the Starksboro Select Board on that issue, school closure issue, as well as other issues. And that's, the committee has that and has reviewed it. We also received a letter from, an email from Herb Olson on behalf of the Starksboro Save Our School Committee, both on school closures and another issue. And we received emails from, it looks like 3 Starksboro residents, Nellie Jennings, Jim and Chris Runcie, and Marguerite Gregory, also on the school closure issue. And then we also received a letter from the Starksboro Planning Commission that Nancy Cornell forwarded it to us, primarily on the school closure issue. So I just want to acknowledge that the committee has received those, and thanks everybody for taking, who have submitted those, for taking the time and sharing that with us. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy to start us off. Looks like Dave, you're raising your hand before we get started. Did you have something you want to add before we get started?
I have a suggestion for language I'd like to make. And it goes like this: elementary school program closure on or after the first day of operation of the new governance entity. An elementary school program will not be closed, repurposed, or otherwise terminated for any of the grade K through 6 student residents in the town where the elementary school program is located, without the approval of the voters of that town.
Okay, so let's revisit that. I think, Tracy, you were going to present some initial information first, so why don't you go ahead and do that, and then we'll circle back.
Sure. Linked in the agenda is a document that is considerations regarding school closure, and it provides some contextual information for the committee to consider. Addressing school closure in the Articles of Agreement is not required in statute, but it can be addressed as part of the articles in the other category. And given the regional interest in the subject and the reality that in 2016 throughout the Act 46 mergers. It was an important topic that was addressed then. It certainly is something that is wise for the committee to address. Some contextual considerations that might be of use relate to what were formerly known as small schools grants and the relevant statutes and more recent Act 73 of 2021 pertaining to small schools grants. These grants, which are awarded to schools with enrollments in grade levels that are below a certain threshold, were converted to what is now known as merger support grants. It's important to know that MAUSD receives a merger support grant, and those grants are associated with Lincoln and Beeman, I believe, and the amounts are specified there. And I did take the liberty of asking the agency if there were any questions about whether or not that merger support grant would continue if a merger were to occur between A&W and MAUSD, and they said that they believe they will continue. So I have that documented via email and shared that with the finance teams in both districts, just in case it ever becomes relevant down the road. But that's an important consideration to understand when thinking about school closure. Also, I included sections of statute regarding school closure. This is a complex issue and there is not a right or wrong answer, but I think it's really important for the committee and for folks who are interested in the question of school closure to understand what the law says. And 16 VSA section 562 gives power to authorize the school board to sell or dispose of schoolhouses. So that's something that has to go to the electorate. Section 563 gives possession, care, control, and management of school property to the school district, again, subject to the authority vested in the electorate, which has to do with sale, and responsibility to keep the buildings and grounds in good repair, safe, and it gives the board the authority to relocate or discontinue the use of a schoolhouse, subject to the provisions of a different section of the law, 821 and 822. That section of the law provides for approval of the electorate if a district is going to stop providing education in any school within the district. So if a district was going to stop operating schools and instead pay tuition for its resident students to attend schools elsewhere, that question has to be approved by the electorate for either elementary or secondary schools. So I do think that perhaps there's misconceptions about which body is responsible per statute for the kinds of decisions around the operations of schools, closing or repurposing a school, and disposal of schools, and encourage the committee to be very thoughtful about those perspectives. Given that legal counsel in the past, during the 2016 Act 46 mergers and prior, in mergers that happened prior voluntarily to 2016, way back as early as Act 153 and prior versions of school governance changes have generally recommended that articles of agreement not unduly limit the powers of any entity to which the powers were granted in statute. So shouldn't unduly limit the powers of the electorate or the board. And if that was going to happen, that should happen for a limited time only. And they recommended at the time up to 4 years. I'm not aware of anything in law or precedent or any challenges to that. It's just the advice that was broadly given by legal counsel throughout prior mergers. So because of the importance of the question and because of the variety of ways that entities handled articles regarding school closure, I also pulled something of a menu of sample articles from Addison Northwest and MAUSD's and sorry, it's Addison Northwest and that should be Addison Northeast, sorry, from your prior articles, and as well as the Agency of Education's imposed language regarding school closure in the articles for organizations that were forced to merge. I included sample language from Elmore Morristown, which merged prior to Act 46 under Act 153, Addison Central's, which is your neighbor, and Champlain Valley's articles as well. And I just want to highlight that Champlain Valley has a policy in addition to their articles around school closure and repurposing in school, repurposing of schools that provides universal school choice for students in all schools pre-K 8. So it's just an interesting variable that's different for them. So there are a number of options. There are no right or wrong answers. There is the importance of being mindful of the impact of maintaining or choosing not to continue to receive small schools grant. And there is the need for careful consideration about the powers that were delegated by the legislature to different stakeholder groups. I will pause and answer questions about any of the background material and welcome or encourage your discussion and some sense of direction regarding what the committee would like to see as possible model articles for further discussion.
So let's start with if anybody has any follow-up questions on what Tracy's presented. Kevin, you do? Okay, go ahead.
So going back to the small school grants, I was under the impression, at least early on in the game with the weighting study, that they were going to do away with the small school grants and it would become part of the small school aspect would become part of the weighting study. Is that, am I just misunderstanding that, or is that still out there?
This is just the information that I have at this time for this area, and in terms of withdraw, I think we have to wait and see what the legislature does. You don't know until it's done.
David, looks like you have a question with what Tracy's presented so far.
Well, I was just going to second sort of what Tracy just said. There definitely is talk, and I'm going to a webinar, and all of you might be interested in going to it as well, that the Vermont School Boards Association is putting on the 10th regarding the final report coming out of the small schools grant task force, not small school, I'm sorry, the weighting task force. And there, that may very well contain a proposal to discontinue merger grants and small school grants. But Tracy's right, it goes to the legislature, and they get to do something entirely different if they choose to.
Brad, you had a question about what Tracy's presented?
Yeah, Tracy, thanks. You may have said it, I may have just missed it. But when you talk about the district electorate having certain rights under the legislative scheme, how do you define the electorate? Is it town by town or just the district electorate?
I believe that it is the electorate of the districts that have the authority over or are responsive or responsible for the decisions authorized or delegated to them by 16 VSA 563. With the current governance structure, it is not the electorate of individual towns.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else have questions on what Tracy's presented? I'm just gonna check. All right, I don't see anything. All right, so let's open it up for discussion on this article. What I'm gonna do is try to make sure we hear from everybody on this. So I'm gonna go ahead and, oh, Erica, did you have something on?
Yeah, I just wanted some clarity. Is there a proposed language that we're looking at, or are we just starting from scratch here? Or starting from the suggested menu?
Yeah.
Okay.
I suggested a menu. I did not want to presume the direction that you wanted to go as a committee, and was hoping that you'd have some discussion and identify some direction or directions you'd like to explore further.
So I guess my question in that case is that it seems like all of these examples are a little bit different from our situation, because they weren't taking 2 middle and high schools and creating 1 high school and 1 middle school, which is one of the options that I think we have. But it does seem a little bit to me like that the decision about what kinds of schools to have would really affect this article. So I don't know, is there a reason to create this article first before we decide, you know, how many schools are we talking about, or what are we going to have? A middle school that's 6 through 8, or are we going to have 2 middle schools and 1 high school, or 2 high schools and 2 middle, or, you know, like I just feel a little bit like overwhelmed because there's too many unanswered questions.
Does the committee as a whole want to first discuss grade, school configurations before we get into this school closure article? What do people think?
So I have proposed language. Do I need to propose it again, or do I need to? I've been trying to find a way to write it in the chat, but I haven't think I seem to be only in a direct message chat.
Yeah, so Dave, we don't want things in the chat because of the public meeting law. The only things in the chat really should be, I'm running late for the meeting, or those sorts of things.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Yeah, I know you proposed language, and that's the crux of the school closure discussion. But I wanted before that to see if that's what the board as a whole wants to get into discussing school closures, or do we want to talk about grade configurations first? Kevin, I see you've got your hand raised.
I'm a little confused. Would this committee establish grade structures, or would that be up to the forming board ultimately to establish that?
Yeah, good question. I think it could be either, but Tracy, can you respond to that?
Yes, I raised my hand because I realized I really didn't do a good job of mentioning grade configurations or school of attendance, which are both also articles that were addressed in the Act 46 mergers in 2016 and do relate to some of the considerations around the issues that you want to address as a committee and that your community is raising for you. School of attendance was often included as an article for a limited period of time, I believe, to give stability in the transition and to give clarity to students and families and employees, for that matter, about what they can expect about where students will go to school. So there are some sample articles in that kind of menu of options that were included in some of those 2016. And in the case of Elmore Morristown, even prior to that, their merger there, that the committee can consider. Again, want to emphasize that those articles where they exist tend to be of a limited duration, again, because the responsibility for that is clearly delegated to school boards by the legislature. And that very well could be an important part of improving opportunities and outcomes for all students, that a board should be charged or is charged with studying deeply, understanding, and providing the governance for as representatives for the community. And the same related to that was grade configurations. Again, ultimately, that is the responsibility of a board to oversee, but limitations were included in articles of the past to provide some of that stability and clarity in a period of transition. So those two things often go with under the other articles category and go with questions about closing schools, or answers to questions about closing schools, rather.
So we're given that piece that Tracy shared, it sounds like there's sort of, lots of pieces to the school closure issue that could also relate to grade configuration and school attendance. Do we want to discuss these jointly? Do we want to discuss them separately? What are people's pleasure in terms of moving forward?
In the interest, oh, Troy has something.
Yeah, I see Troy. Go ahead, Troy.
Can you hear me? Look, I just looked through all the language from the different districts, and I looked at the one from the state, Article 4B. Am I correct in understanding that is the least restrictive language we can use? Or I guess my question is we have to have some language in there. And is the state saying in Article 4B that you at least have to have that? If we want to create more restrictions to close schooling in a certain location, then we can add that, but we can't go less than this. Is that correct?
Tracy, I'm gonna.
You do not have to have any language about school closure. It is not a required area to address, but it is clearly an area that the region, the communities that you serve have lots of questions and concerns about and would like to have it addressed. You could decide to not include an article, you could include an article, and you could discuss as a committee and make a decision about what level of restriction you think is appropriate and necessary, and also would meet legal muster for the long haul, again, so that you're transparent and clear with constituents into the future. Hang on just a second so I can answer a little bit more of the question. When it comes to so is optional, but again, something that was commonly included to give clarity and comfort and provide stability and transition. And let's see. Grade configurations and changes to grade configurations also falls under that category. So again, it's optional, not required, but has been included frequently in the past to provide stability and transition, to provide clarity, and to assist with helping people understand what to expect in the first year or years of operations.
Dave, go ahead.
So I'm presuming that we're operating under Robert's Rules of Order. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I move this. This is a motion I'm making, and we can have this discussion and dispose, amend, or whatever we like with the motion. But I move that language. If you'd like me to repeat it, I'm happy to do that. That will give us a structure. I think Robert's Rules is designed to give us a structure in how we go about debating things. And this would do that. So my motion is that elementary school program closure, it's the title of the article, on and after the first day of operation of the new governance entity, an elementary school program will not be closed, repurposed, or otherwise terminated for any of the grade K through 6 students resident in the town where the elementary school program is located without the approval of the voters of that town.
We don't have an action item for this, so it's kind of an awkward motion.
Yeah, I don't, so it's true. So our agenda doesn't have that we're taking action on this article today. And so I don't think we can come to a final determination today. We have just that we're going to discuss today, and there may be people in the public who want to have comments that aren't here today because they looked at the agenda and saw that we're not taking action at this meeting. So I think, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be out of order to actually vote on an article today, and that we need to discuss, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong in terms of the agenda and notice and Tracy, you have your hand raised. Are you responding to that or just,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to comment or judge the operations of the meeting, but would like to offer a suggestion that might help you move forward. And I wonder if Dave would be willing to send the text of his draft of his proposed article, and anyone else who has a specific proposal, email just me directly, and the co-chairs could be included, and I could prepare for you a compilation of any of the suggestions or the potential articles that the committee would like to formally discuss, move second, and ultimately vote on at the upcoming meeting. I was thinking that you might not be ready yet, and that kind of process might be a good next step to get some specific language in front of people for a more in-depth discussion.
Dave, does that work for you?
Sure, that works for me.
Okay, thanks. So it seems like we're having a little bit of trouble then moving forward with the conversation. And here's what I would suggest. Why don't we go around, and if people could just share sort of what their thoughts are, concerns, pros, cons, just generally. I'm not looking for, maybe some people already have decided, what they think it should be, but I think there's probably many who would like to many of us would like to hear what people are thinking in terms of pros, cons on all three of these issues, grade configuration, school attendance, and closures. So does that sound good? We'll just go around and get everybody's thoughts, and that'll help us. I know for me, it helps me to hear what other people are thinking. Does that work? Thumbs up? All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody. So Dustin, you want to start?
Sure. I guess things on my mind I'm thinking about as far as like grade configurations. I feel like we may be getting ahead of ourselves in this committee to be including that, just because I know with the the work that the board is doing and with Nate Levittson and all the proposals that were submitted, I think that all needs to sort of go through the process it's going through and see what comes from that. And as far as articles around school closure, I know my inbox, as lots of people on the committees probably had their inbox filled with letters expressing concerns about school closures from residents of Starksboro and Lincoln. And I do fear that, if we don't include anything in our articles for what they'd like to see, that might just be a real roadblock that we're not gonna be able to overcome, because I think not including anything would essentially give the forming board full authority to close or repurpose schools, and I think that really may be a no-go in our communities here. So that's what's on my mind right now.
Thanks, Dustin. Did you have anything on school attendance, or is that similar to the grade configuration?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the grade configuration. I do think certainly some language for at least, the first years, just so everyone has some clarity and can feel secure knowing that at least 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 4 years out, I think 4 years is a good time frame, that this is what it's going to look like. This is where I can anticipate that my children are going to school, and for staff, this is where I'm going to be working. I think that is good. I think that should be included in our articles of agreement.
Thanks, Dustin. Erica?
I guess I just really feel like I need more time to think about all of this, but in terms of, determining the grade levels and the different configurations of schools, I guess, it does seem wise to give the boards the leeway to determine that, but I'm also afraid, like, for example, in Dave's model language of his proposed article, you know, it specified 6th grade, but what if 6th grade is part of a middle school? So I just feel concerned that we need to make language that is flexible enough on the one hand, but not perceived as just kind of toothless or wishy-washy on the other hand. And I mean, also it's my concern, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place of being saying this, but that a lot of people hear merger and go to school closure, when in my perception of it is the way to keep our small schools is to pool our resources. And that's what a merger is for. So I don't know how come I have such a different perspective on that. And maybe I'm naive or wrong. That's possible. But I really do feel like the whole, one of the reasons that I would support a merger is because it would give small schools a fighting chance. So anyway, if there's some way that we can, I don't know, like in the example from Addison Northwest, they say that in they quote, it's not the state's intention to close its small schools, but rather to ensure that those schools have opportunity to enjoy the expanded educational opportunities and economies of scale that are available to schools within larger and more flexible governance models. So that's where I'm coming from. And I feel like that message is not getting out to the public. And that concerns me.
Thanks, Erica. Keith?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think in regards to arranging schools, including attendance, I think we need to strike a balance somewhere between providing clarity to the community so that they have something concrete to vote on. They know, as someone already mentioned, they know what to anticipate for the first few years of a merger, but also to not step on the toes of a hypothetical board that will be deeply involved in this work for the long-term future of this community. So I don't know where that line is at the moment. It's there. I don't know where to see it exactly. Regarding school closure and where we vest that power to close schools or not, specifically, there's precedence, I think, in both districts for both ways of doing this. If I'm not misremembering this, NWSD has more of the phase out model in their articles of agreement. The X number of years, the board cannot close the school without a town vote. And then the Mount Abe, correct me if I'm wrong, had an indefinite model where a vote would always be needed. Is that correct for a school closure?
I think there was some debate about that around repurposing, but the board ultimately concluded that the intent was not to allow repurpose or closures.
Yeah, so regardless of where we fall as a committee, there's, I think, precedence for both ways of doing it within these communities. So even if the legislature there we go, has intended to vest that power in school boards specifically, I think there's precedent for not necessarily adhering to that, if that is what this committee decides is best for the communities moving forward. And as we've seen, there's definitely a desire within the community to make sure that that power stays within the voters' grasp.
Thanks, Keith. Kevin?
So I been struggling this for a while because, you know, we've been going through this on the MAUSD side for a while. I do have a concern to allow a town to vote is going to have a significant impact on school operations, unforeseen in the future. I think it would really restrict the future boards in developing the best avenue, if you will, for any sort of an ends or a quality of or equity of education. However, I do think there is a time and a place for a district-wide vote. I'm concerned about what one town may want or think or believe they need can impact another 9 towns in this case if we all go together. And those 9 towns are held helpless, if you will, based on what that one particular town decides, which seems to me, I keep going back to the thought, and I don't know if there's case or if it would prevail, but you know, one person, one vote, and to allow a sub-entity within a district to dominate that it's not very common at all in governance today. I think town schools should be protected, though, to the extent that they're not a burden on performance or cost. And if they do become a burden on performance or cost, there should be some sort of period of correction or realignment, if you will, to try to make them all work together in a reasonable configuration. And then only at that point, if it can't be realigned, if you will, so there's not a burden on other towns for a given school in a town, if you will, then at that point, that's the point. It should become a district-wide decision, not the town's decision. I also think, and I also think that if a town is not satisfied with a district decision about that particular town's school, and again, I don't know if it hold up in court or not, but that town should have the flexibility to go on their own and pursue what they believe to be the type of education that they want their townspeople to have, or their town students to have. I think it's really unhealthy and to have a town locked into a district that there's friction where they are causing they're causing a problem, or they're causing an abnormality, but everybody has to live with that, and there's no option there. So I think there needs to be some protection for town schools if everything's going along honky-dory or within some set of guardrails, if you will. But I don't think that it gets so biased when a town starts thinking about what they want. They've stopped looking at the big picture, and I think that's dangerous. As far as grade configuration, I'm not, you know, we've talked about middle schools being 6 to 8. We've talked about middle schools being 5 to 8. I'm very concerned with anything that talks about, you know, the schools operating as they do today as a K to 6 or something like that. I think, again, that's really hamstringing any future boards and flexibility to operate in the future. I am pretty open-minded, and I don't know, open. I'm pretty. I don't have a lot of opinion about attendance, if you will. I'm of sort of a. I've gone back and forth, and I've always sort of thought about how to make it equitable. But then again, if there's any sort of movement that doesn't cause a burden that parents can deal with, maybe that should be considered and not restricted even within some transitionary period, or maybe it should be. But I mean, if you can go from school A, which your student is, or you don't feel your student's in the right environment to B, and school B can accommodate that person without any impact to programming or services, I'm not really sure why we would be concerned with that. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Kevin. Dave?
Yeah, so my biggest concern is about if this committee really thinks that we ought to merge. I think that, like Dustin pointed out, that it's a non-starter for many people in our communities if the town doesn't retain this ability to control their own school. Kevin put some interesting thoughts out there. Of course, we could just privatize the district. I'm sure that would make a lot of DeVos followers happy. I believe in strong public schools, and I think a new school board should be able to do that. There are lots of really good articles and reasons to have K-8 through schools, to have 7, 8, and 9 middle schools, to have 10, 11, 12 high schools. And our districts are unique, as many other districts are. So the new school board should be able to create the best educational environment for our students. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thanks. Becca.
I feel like my thoughts really lie mostly around school configuration at this moment in time. I really think that needs to be really thoughtful. I know that we've been talking that should be left to the school board that comes after us. And I understand that philosophy and that thought process. But at the same time, I really feel like there needs to be a plan that's laid out to begin with for that, for both stability for the students and the employees going forward, just for the stability of that. Because I have children in this district, and I'm employed at Addison Northwest also. And as a parent, I would want to know where my student is going, where my child is going, and where their future is, and what is going to be offered to them. Before I make this vote to say, yes, I want the merger to happen, I want to know what they're going to be getting for their education. And so I feel like that configuration is really the key to my vote, to say, yes, I want this merger to happen. So I feel like that school configuration is at the heart of everything for me. And then the school closure would come after that. So that's where I am. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is I'm hearing a lot from Mount Aid, the Mount Aid district constituents. I haven't heard anything really from the Virgins, from the ANWSD constituents about how they're feeling about, you know, this idea of closures or the merger. So I would like to hear more about from them about what they're feeling and thinking about it. So those are my thoughts.
Mary Kate, you were muted when you asked.
Sorry, I figured that out. Thank you. Brad.
Yeah, I think I really will look forward to seeing some broader language and being able to comment on it. I have a little trouble sort of organizing my thoughts without kind of seeing a structure of how an article related to these three issues might be structured. So I'm looking forward to that, Tracy. Having, you know, with respect to the three areas, I think, you know, my inclination is to err on the side of giving as much, you know, sort of local control over closure or attendance or class configuration as possible. I think that is, based in my interactions with folks around the community, that seems to be much more is much more responsive than a more sort of top-down approach to this sort of thing. Having said that, I think on the reconfiguration or configuration of classrooms or the attendance, my view is that if it's a good idea, Dave pointed out that there were a lot of studies out there with various kinds of considerations. If it's a good idea, I think the towns would probably leap on it, and it would be incumbent upon the new board to make the case for it. I think that's my take on it. That if it's a good idea, it will, the towns will come around. With respect specifically to the school closure issue, in light of the decision that was taken by the MAUSD board, a month and a half ago, I would not be able to support an article that doesn't include the language that Dave has presented. So those are my thoughts.
Sarah. Oh, sorry.
Me?
Ed, go ahead.
Thanks, Mary Kate. I'll say for starters that I was prepared to second David's motion and let this discussion go where it would. For me, the elementary school students are closely associated and need that connection to their towns. But as they move together to form the middle and the high school, now you're talking about the entire district, and it becomes less a question about the closeness of the students to their hometown. So I'm mindful of how much time we've got to report out. It's the end of the school year that we got to report out. And I cannot imagine coming up with a plan that says this school is going to stay open, this one's going to be repurposed, whatever. I just can't imagine that we'll have enough data, information, planning done by then to make a coherent proposal like that. So for me, I focus on middle high school, where that line is between elementary, middle, and high school. I remember when I was teaching that somebody told us that in the state of Vermont, there were like 25 different middle school models. And I taught in a K-8 school at one point. And then the kids went from there on to 5 different high schools that they're choosing that the town would tuition them to. So there are a lot of ways to crack this egg. That's about as far as my thinking goes tonight.
I was muted again. Sorry about that. Stephanie?
Let me unmute myself. So I have concerns about students living in towns that may have school closures or may be impacted by their town leaving the unified district. It seems like there's a lot of focus on the elementary students and not much focus on the high school students. I support clarity and flexibility in the articles with consideration for grandfathering students with regard to school choice. I'm hopeful that my children and other Lincoln and Starksboro or other town students can attend the unified school district or the unified district high school or a school of their choice without having to pay tuition out of pocket. With regard to grade level and attendance, I hope that we will focus on the developmental needs of students when considering grade level changes. I advocate that we use educational studies and brain research about what is best for students regarding grade levels. I also advocate that the board get input from all stakeholders, especially the educators and the administrators who see how the schools work and have a very important viewpoint.
Mary?
Whew, this is a lot of stuff. I agree with a lot of what Kevin said. I think a lot of small schools losing local control is not ideal and not anything any of us want. So I want to make sure there's language in our articles that they don't lose all the say in what happens to their school, but at the same time, I want to make sure we don't hamstring any potential future board when there's one town that doesn't want to vote for the best interests of their students because they want their school or something like that. That concerns me. I also worry that we're putting all of our focus on our elementary school students when there's a lot of time from elementary school till the time they're going to be applying for colleges for those of them that want to go to college. And I want to make sure we have equal focus on providing a quality education that will allow students to go where they want to after high school. As far as school choice, I think in Addison Northwest, we've allowed families to move between elementary schools when there's been space in the schools, and that seems to have been working pretty well. I think like we're not gonna, if you are in a different town, your parent has to provide transportation, I believe. But I think it's nice that if for some reason a child is not thriving in a certain school environment, we have small schools, but we have a lot of options for different kinds of small schools as it stands. So I would love to keep that open as an option for kids. I think that's mostly, I agree with Becca about, I like the idea of a new board being able to decide what happens to our students, but I also think we can't expect the people of Addison County to do a merger and then a couple years later something changes and then a couple years later there's another big change. Like I think it's easier to do everything at once, see where you're going, have a plan, even if it's broken up into steps. But I think if we can have a plan where people know where they're going, then they know what they're agreeing to, and it would be less stressful for everyone in the community. I think that's mostly it for now. I do want to say that I agree with a lot of what the language that was in Dave's proposal, but I think specifically, since we don't yet know what grades might be going which places, or we don't have a plan for that yet, I want to make sure we either have a plan before we start language or have flexible language to allow for future changes.
Sarah? Thanks for letting me know I was muted too.
Yes, sorry. I want to err on the side of less is more. I think we should have really minimal language about all of the things. I agree that I think a lot of the anxiety comes from not knowing what is happening, and the longer everything takes and the more we don't have clarity about a plan, we clearly, it's harder to say, oh yeah, I want to do that if I don't know what the plan is. So I agree with the fact that we need at least some kind of a menu or a direction, but I also don't want to have it in set language that is permanent. I'm really against any kind of language that doesn't have a, sort of an expiration date or some kind of a plan that way. I also think with the school closure stuff, like currently we have 10 towns and 3 of the towns don't have a school that they're voting on, and it just feels like why that's not all that fair to those group of towns. I'm interested in the overall vote by everybody. I guess I could potentially see that. I think a vote by a town at this point is actually, I don't know that it totally works in this merged situation, just because we have 2 really different situations. And I'm the school attendance thing, and I really don't think we should overly put our hands in unless it's just for a temporary hold, I guess, or a plan for stability, as was stated. I think those are my thoughts for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Carol?
Hey, I have to agree with a lot that everyone has said. As far as, I guess I don't know where to start. So with school closures, I really like what Kevin had to say about having more of a district-wide vote, having been from a town where our school was closed. And I do think that was the right decision, because there's a certain point where schools reach a point where they're no longer fiscally or socially viable for giving kids the educational opportunities that they need. And it's really hard for people who don't have kids in those schools, and sometimes even the parents who do, to recognize how detrimental that actually is. So I know in our town, the vote was not to close the school. And I think that came from a lack of education about what was actually happening in the schools. So I really like the idea of a district-wide vote, in part because that forces the school board to be more transparent about what's going on in the schools and really argue their case for why it is the best thing, not just for that town, but for the whole district. So I really believe in small schools, and I think it's really important to have a vote available where it's not a unilateral decision by the board to close schools. But I wouldn't want to leave it up just to the town, because there's a lot of emotion that goes into those decisions beyond what's best for the kids. As far as where students are going to go, we really need to know what the layout is of our educational plan. I like the idea of asking the educators what they have to think or have to say. And as far as where students are going to go. I agree completely with Becca about my own personal vote. I need to know where my kids are going to go to school and feel stable and comfortable with that choice. And I also think, from what I've heard from a lot of people who are really reticent about supporting the merger, everyone wants to know that their kids are not going to be on the school bus for 3 hours a day, 90 minutes each way. So if we can make sure that all parents know what their kids' school route would be even before they vote for the merger option, that will really make a lot of parents feel more comfortable with whatever they choose to vote for. So that's been the main deterrent I've heard from a lot of people. So trying to be quick because we're running out of time. So I think I covered all the topics.
Thanks, Carol. Appreciate it. It is, I think it's important, really important conversation. So taking the time. Troy?
I agree with everything that's been said, which is why it makes this such a complicated issue. You know, I've been jotting down some notes here, and I got to say, I heard Sarah or somebody said something about fear, and I think back to something somebody told me once about that the kids are always going to be fine. It's the adults who are generally the ones who are the most panicked and the most afraid. If we just took all the kids in this entire district tomorrow and shuffled them all around to brand new buildings, in 8 days, they'd probably be fine. It's really the adults that probably have the most concern. The kids aren't thinking about this at all and don't. But I think we do have a responsibility to our children, to all of our children, to provide the best education we can, but we have to be able to afford that. And that's the hard part, right? If the reason we're here is because of the money, there's no other reason we're here. And my nephews went to South Royalton when it was merging with Rochester and a couple schools. And they talked about how little opportunity they had in high school, like just the lack of access to courses. And we're in the same classrooms with 8 kids all day long. And somebody talked about the social, and that's real. And I think we have been talking a lot about the elementary schools. You spend 6 or 7 years in elementary school in this district, you spend another 6 in your high school, middle school. And I think we often forget that we put a lot of emphasis on that lower end, and rightly so. And the emphasis needs to be the whole way through. But I agree with Kevin in some regards that I think nobody should be held where they don't want to be. And the benefits of being in a merged district and living in a society and everybody paying taxes toward the pot is we split and share the costs. And if you're going to get all the benefits of being in a district, that's great. But at some point in time, if there's just not enough students in your building and you're going to have one teacher, then that's what you're going to have, unless you want to leave the district and pay for more teachers. Like, I just don't know how to reconcile that in my financial brain. So I think some of it is just the clarity about what does it mean to have less and less and less students. It means you have less and less humans to be in charge of those students, and less resources that the entire district is able to pay for those less and less students. But I think we can figure it out. I think we can be creative. And to somebody's point about what are we merging for and toward, shame on us if we don't ever think about what can we do better. Like, why aren't we thinking about making an arts high school that's just much smaller in one spot, and making a different academy in a different place, and having, I don't know, a summer offering? Like, if we can do things differently, and we don't. We still run our classes from January to June, and we run them from August to December or January. We're stuck in these boxes, and I think these communities are amazing. And my wife taught in Robinson, my kids went to Bristol, and I teach in a different school district, and all the teachers and the adults in these communities are amazing, and our kids are going to be fine. And I think we have to have the resilience as the adults to make the best possible decisions for everybody, and to think about how do we make the best possible future. I don't know what else to say besides that, but.
Thanks, Troy. Martha, you want to?
Yep, I agree. I agree too with everybody, and I think this is really, really a difficult decision. And personally, you know, to answer the question that we were asked about grade configuration, you know, I don't have the answer, but I know it should probably go by numbers and what, I mean, my thought is what educators think, because they're the ones that know, and I don't. So until, you know, I guess when we get into some of these things, I want to get some input from these people as well. As far as where people go to school, I'm indifferent on that. I'm not. And about the closure, I know that whatever happens, I don't want to have my kids, or who are, most of them are adults now, being on the same committee in 4 more years trying to do the same thing. I don't want this to be a Band-Aid. I want whatever we choose, or whatever is chosen to propose, because that is what the charge of the committee is to study or advise. I really want that to be something that will be around for a long time, rather than just something that's temporary. And I don't know how to do that, but I'm learning.
Thanks, Martha. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any board members. If I missed a board member, can you speak up?
How about you, Mary Kate? Can you, are you able to talk on this a little bit for yourself?
You know, I gotta say, I agree with everyone. I think that part of, I mean, there's 2 things that sort of guide me. One is I really believe strongly in equity, and my concern around all of these issues, well, grade configuration, I guess, is more, you know, just what's best in terms of educationally for students. And I agree, getting input from people who are experts on that is important. And that, and I also tend to agree with, well, actually, I think it was maybe Mary who said, or Rebecca who said that I think if we're going to change the grade configurations, we should do, for the middle school, we should do that as part of this work, rather than not doing it now and then having it done, you know, in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, just in terms of stability. If we can make that decision, basically getting input that helps with that decision. In terms of the other issues, you know, both school closures and attendance, I really want kids in all schools to get the same education and what I see, and have the same opportunities, and for us to be fiscally able to provide opportunities at the high school level and the middle school level. At the elementary schools, you know, as our districts are configured right now, you know, some kids are in classrooms with, you know, 1 teacher and 13 kids, and other kids have, you know, 1 teacher and 24 kids. You know, that doesn't seem like equity. And so if we gave flexibility to move students around, you know, that may help with that. I'd also think otherwise giving flexibility to the new board is important, in that we don't know, it's hard to know what's going to happen in the future, right? And we don't want to foreclose the future school boards being able to make the hard decisions with community input about what to do in terms of what's best for students. All right, I see Dave, you've got your hand up. You want to jump in again? I'm a little, I don't really want to go around again with everyone, but did you
I'll just be really short. One of the exciting things about Patrick's proposal for the Mount Abe district was the notion of innovation centers. And I totally agree with Troy that here we are stuck in this box when we could be thinking about some exciting new ways of doing education. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay. All right. Great. So I did see someone left a comment with a member from the public saying they wanted to say something. We generally do public comment at the end unless we're have an action item. So I just wanted to let the public know that. So I think this is a start to this conversation, and really, really appreciate all the input from people. You guys shared stuff that I hadn't thought of, and just really appreciate that. I think it's helpful for all of us. Tracy, I'm going to go ahead and let you move us on to maybe something hopefully a little simpler. Well, actually, maybe not the compensation. Yeah.
So I have a proposal that we table considerations for board composition and the Article 14A, which should be a pretty easy one for you to consider for a future meeting. I'd like to foreshadow that I think as I work with superintendents and co-chairs, we might need a little flexibility, and I might need some time to work with educators, for example, on their feedback before bringing school closure back to the board. So perhaps the next meeting might end up being focused on understanding considerations for board consideration. In some, I'm foreshadowing the need for flexibility and asking you not to be concretely expecting this on the next agenda, but we will get it on as soon as we can, including the next agenda if we're able, and we'll continue this really good work and the good conversations that you're having. Yeah, and then we'll just keep plugging away at the articles. So with that, if we table those two, Mary Kate, you can go on to communication and public comment.
Perfect. Appreciate that, Tracy. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Everybody's good with that, I assume. Okay, great. Communication key points, a lot to try to put into a summary, but who has some thoughts on putting that together?
Well, it seems like the first thing we did was refine some of the articles that we had discussed, refine the language on articles we discussed from last time.
Thanks. If someone wants to just jump in, go ahead and start speaking. No need to raise your hand on this.
Just to piggyback on that, specifically Articles 3 and 4.
I'll summarize just that we had a really good discussion about pros, cons, thoughts, concerns around grade configuration, attendance, school closure issues. And Troy, go ahead and add.
I'd like to, these are the communication points that go out to the community, right? I just really like to make sure the community knows that I feel pretty strongly that this board is a really nice reflection of our communities, and that is not lost on the people here doing this work what the struggles are, you know. And I know that people always feel like a committee gets thrown into a room and all these things happen in the dark of night or whatever, but that is not the case. We're wrestling with really emotional and hard things that we don't want to have to deal with, and ideally education has all the money we need, but we don't. And I just want the community to understand that I feel really strongly myself personally that this group is really doing the work for the people and is a good representation of all the views out there.
Thanks, Troy. Really appreciate it. I think it'd be hard to summarize all the points that we made, but just add maybe to the summary that, this is recorded, and if people are interested in, they should look at the recording to see sort of all of the issues that we've been struggling and our thoughts on that. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to open it up to public comment. I would ask that unless those who have presented some written material to the board, unless you have something further to add, to note that we do have that material, and we have reviewed that, and it's part of what we're all taking into consideration. So, oops, was I muted on all of that? No, okay. So, yep, just raise your hand. I see Herb Olson, go ahead, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the video up. Sorry about that. So you can see me in all my glory. I'm upside down, son of a gun. Okay, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk. Yes, I did submit something on behalf of the Starksville Save Our Schools Committee. Hopefully outlined, where we're coming from. But few additional points. I think especially over on the Virgin side of things, people seem a little mystified about why folks over on the Mount Abe side are all excited about this, and especially Starksboro and Lincoln. Well, there's a reason for that. The district administration has been trying to close our schools for over a year. And they tried to do it last year, and it didn't move that quickly. So now we got a merger study committee, which seems to a lot of us to be a way to do that in another, with another vehicle. People are talking about, we need to do what's best for the students. And frequently when people say that, they want to defer to, a district administrator or the board. We've been through the mill over in Starksboro and some of the other towns, and we don't agree that the proposals that are being proposed are in the best interests of students. So that's why we're really excited about this. One separate comment, Tracy mentioned a couple of times a legal opinion around the issue of whose authority is it to close a school. And the language that I heard her say was a little unclear. Sometimes it was referred to as a recommendation that the electorate not be involved. Sometimes it was, well, the state statutes really won't allow you to do that. I haven't seen that opinion. And if that's going to be used as a basis for the committee taking a position, I think it needs to be shared. There are people on this committee who could take a look at the opinion and form, their own judgment about that. Finally, as I think Dustin and maybe a few others said, this is a really important issue. If you have the authority to do what you don't want, and if you don't want to include any provisions like this, there you go. But that will have consequences. And I think you need to take that into consideration. Take a look at the last paragraph of the Starksboro Select Board issue, and you'll see where we'll be heading. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Herb. I see, Alex, you have your hand up, but before that, I'm just going to read, Dave, I'm going to just read what you put in the chat just for transparency purposes. Under the open meeting law, we need to share that and let, or you can read it if you want.
I'd be happy to read it. Let's see.
I've got it right here, Dave. I can just read it. Dave just indicated in the chat, I was interested in the notion of giving the new school board flexibility. I've been on the MAUSD board for a couple of years now and have experienced a version of policy governance that turns over virtually all control. Many have to the administration. So just, yeah, I just want to read that because as I indicated earlier, we're subject to open meeting law, and so chat and emails and such should only be used if there's things like driving late. So just wanted to get that out there. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm Alex McGuire and I'm from Virgins. I feel privileged that I know everyone representing the Addison Northwest School District, and I know they all are hardworking and dedicated individuals. I'm sure the same is true for the other side. I just want to offer this. I have taken so many notes and jotted down so many questions. I can't possibly share them all. I'll probably try to email. I appreciated Becca saying that they want to hear more from both sides of the aisle, but I want to just ask if you guys could try to clarify your messaging to the public, because I feel like a lot of the work you're doing is buried in your meeting minutes and people just aren't going to go dig and look for those. And I've been trying to read them and I still don't understand what exactly you're doing. Honestly, like, you're not proposing specifics, but you're paying consultants to talk about busing routes. That sounds like you're deciding things. You're writing articles of agreement. That sounds like you're deciding things. So I'm walking away tonight appreciating all the thought and effort going in, but not really understanding the direction you're headed in on the truncated timetable that you're working under. So I think the public needs to hear a lot more about what's going on. I'm just leaving tonight a little bit confused. So I think some clarity would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. Nancy Cornell.
Thanks, Mary Kate. It was very interesting to listen to the points of view tonight. And I've been thinking so much about the issue of school closure. And I just wanted to say a couple of things especially about the work that you're doing. I mean, as I've talked to people in our town and elsewhere about the work of the Merger Study Committee, one of the things that I find, really there's one thing that I found that everyone seems to agree on. And that is that, that it's worthwhile to pursue serious conversation about ways our two districts can collaborate to save money. Because as Troy said, this is about saving money and saving money for the long haul. And I think one of the things that where people get upset and emotional, and I would say emotional in the interest of kids, is when collaboration moves initially right to the question of merging governance. And that's where people really seem to part company. And so I've been thinking about how could this proceed in a way that ends up with people working together and feeling good about the where we end up. And I do think that if you were moving, focusing more on collaboration and less on governance, focusing on ways to save money in the near term, by doing some things, more things than we're already doing, because we're already doing more things together, finding ways for to increase, say, the opportunities for high school kids by collaborating across schools now, partly remotely, partly in person. That is, all kinds of ways to think out of the box collaboratively and ways to save money. That might help people over the longer haul feel more comfortable about later on considering a merger in governance. Right now, it looks like that would be a terribly divisive thing to do, to merge governance. But there are steps you could take now and over the next year that would give our two districts more experience and build more trust around ways to collaborate, both in the interest of increasing opportunities for kids and in the interest of saving money. So I hope that's something you'll think about.
Thanks, Nancy. Anyone else from the public? Trisha.
Hi, Terza Osmond Palmer, actually. I'm from Starksboro, right down the road from Lincoln, though. It makes me sad that Lincoln has already left the school district, and it would be even worse to see Starksboro have to do that, because the school district overall that anyway, I won't go into that. Already seems like there are decisions being made without the community's input right now. And it's disturbing to the parents. And it's not because I want a better schooling for my child over any children that go to Bristol. It's because I'm thinking about all the kids and these schools that I've been familiar with for my entire life. I'm not on a board like this because I cannot understand practically many of the words that are going on, especially things that Tracy brought up. And that's another upsetting point, that there's someone being paid to help make a decision who is unrelated, I believe, to either of these school districts that we're working with. I really hope you just listen to the community and let us be involved more. And overall, let us vote on any school closures or repurposing. And like Herb said, there's a last line of the letter that was sent that is, saying that Starksboro could indeed leave the school district as well. And I think that would be detrimental to everybody. But if it has to be done, it has to be done. So thank you for letting me speak.
We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Terza. It doesn't look like we have anything else from the public. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Troy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion is adjourned. And again, thank you everybody for the thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate all of you. So your chairs will talk and figure out our next steps as we try to wade our way through all of this. You guys have a happy new year.